Today I'm going to show you how to mix your drum audio for drum playthroughs specifically. So I'm going to show you how to take your drums from sounding like this to sounding like this. I know the environment around drum playthroughs is quite hostile and you don't want to sample or edit the drums at all, so I'm going to show you how to get the most out of your drum sounds without using any samples. Now, we did use really old skins on a kit that's actually meant for Motown, and this is like a hardcore song. So the drums don't really sound the greatest, which might be good because I'm assuming that a lot of you may not have a studio setup or the best drums to record your drum playthroughs, but you want them to sound good. Now, this is a drum playthrough that I've already released, so I figured the easiest way to go about this is to reverse engineer what I did rather than mix them from scratch. So right off the bat, by looking at these, you're gonna say like, bro, like you told me you didn't edit your drums, why are there all these cuts? So these are the toms, and basically what I always do with toms is opposed to using a gate, because gates are really unreliable on toms, it's much better to manually gate them. Every section that there aren't toms happening, so I basically cut out here, and then at the end you just do a little fade out. It's up to you how long you want to do the fade out. Like for me, you can go longer if you want. Some people will like to have it ring out the duration of the tom, but for me, I honestly just want the attack of it and a little bit of ring out. I want to basically make sure that the next cymbal isn't too loud. So the first thing that I like to do is take all of my related tracks and put them in their correct groups. So what I do is I take my kick in and my kick out, and then I make one group in Ableton, and this way I can affect both of these at the same time. So if you're using Logic or if you're using Pro Tools, basically you would create an auxiliary track, and then you would take these two, and then you would make sure that the output of these tracks is the input of the auxiliary track, and that would do the exact same thing. Whenever I'm mixing, I don't actually listen to things in solo, but it's just unfortunately going to be the easiest for me to show you what I'm doing in solo. So let's just solo the kick. So really the only thing I'm putting on these individual kick tracks is a plugin that lets me phase align them to the overheads. If you don't know too much about phase aligning, basically, as you can see, this is the kick in and this is the kick out. And when looking at it, you can see it starts going up and then it goes down and then it goes back up again. And then this one, kick out, starts going up and going back down. So these are in phase with one another. And you can tell because sometimes when you're recording, you'll see that this one of them will be flipped upside down. So it would actually start lower and then go like that. And that sounds incorrect. So let me show you what it would sound like. I like to make sure that each track is in phase with the overheads because the overheads are picking up the entire kit. So since they're picking up everything, if everything's in phase with the overheads, there should be zero issues. So once I have all of the drums phase aligned with the overheads, what I like to do is jump into the actual mixing. So oftentimes I'll start with the kick drum and the snare drum just to get them up to par. So with the kick drum, what I do once I grouped it together, I first off gated it. So let's turn off all of the plugins, and this is what it sounds like on its own. So not bad. They're not amazing, but they don't sound bad. First thing I like to do is actually gate it. So basically, we're going to put on a gate, and then every time the kick drum goes off, you'll hear the kick drum, and then it closes depending on how quickly you have the gate closed. So as you can see, that's really quick. But I want the kick drum to ring out a little bit more. So first I'm going to mess with the hold, and that basically tells the trigger of the gate how long to hold the note before it closes again. Something like that's not too bad. Usually I'm around like between 100 and 200, but since it's a quick song, 75 is not bad. And then I'll set the release, and basically it's like, it's gonna hold for that long, and then I want it to last a little bit longer and kind of fade out, and that's what the release is gonna do. So next up, this is one of my favorite plugins for kick and snare. You don't have to have this one, but basically it's just saturating all of my sub frequencies. So this is it without. It's basically the same thing as just like taking an EQ and boosting from 70 hertz and down, but it's also saturating it. Next up, I like to use channel strips because there's something beautiful about like creating the sound without like physically looking at it. Like sometimes you'll use a graphic EQ like this where you can see where everything is, and then you're making adjustments based on what you're seeing rather than what you're hearing sometimes. It's nice to not rely on your eyes at all and just rely on the sound and think like, okay, I want more click or I want more sub. That's why I really like using these kind of channel strips. And basically what I'm doing is adding quite a bit of low end. As you can see, like I'm adding, I don't even know. That's the beautiful thing. I honestly don't know how much I'm adding. I'm just listening to how much it needs. Of 100 and lower, if you click bell, it'll just be like a bandwidth one. This is basically a shelf. And then I realized there was like a lot of frequencies in the low mids I didn't really like, but I didn't want to get rid of them completely. And then again, I added click in the high mids as well as in the high end. And the high mids, I like adding it in here because you get to choose your frequency and you get to choose like how clicky you get with it. So for example, you can go really narrow with the EQ. And just find the spot that you like. I liked it around 6K. And the rest is history. And then I like adding around 8K as a shelf when it comes to the high end. So before. And then next up, there was some more frequencies in the low mids that I found like a bit interrupting. Like they kind of saturate a bit, like they're getting so loud that they saturate a bit. So I just figured cutting out this area did it for me. Next up, I add a compressor. I really like the distressor. You don't have to have this one, but just the principle when it comes to kick drum in general, I find is that you want to go slow with your attack and then fast with your release. Especially in like metal and hardcore music where they're really quick. You don't want to have it going too slow of a release because you'll lose, especially when you do like double kicks, you'll lose a lot of the volume of every hit except for the first one. And then if you have the attack too fast. And basically what that means is that for the attack being slow, it's going to let's say these are milliseconds. So let's say it's going to allow 10 milliseconds before the compression actually starts. If I start it right away, it's compressing right away. So the kick drum just like instantly gets dropped in volume. Obviously we can roll back on the input, but then having the release, it's just like once the compression starts, it's going to last and like kind of fade out for, again, pretending these are milliseconds, like 0.5 milliseconds. And then this is a personal preference. I also like to add a limiter at the end of my kick drum chain and my snare chain. And really it's not doing much. It's just like I'm able to push the kick drum as much as possible before it distorts. And I can show you what it sounds like when it distorts. It gets gross and interruptive. You could hear there when I went one scroll up, it went to like distorted, and I want to avoid that. So that's it for my kick drum. Then when it comes to my snare drum, on the individual tracks, I have some EQing going on, and then I have what's called a transient designer. And the transient designer is basically exactly designing the transient. So I have it so that it's cutting a little bit of sustain and boosting a bit of the attack. So if I go crazy with the attack, it's adding a lot of that snap. And then if I cut the sustain a lot, we're not getting any of the sustain of the drum. So I just want to cut a bit of the sustain and add a little of attack. You actually don't need this at all. And often I won't use this, but it just worked in this case scenario for this song. Basically, there were some frequencies that were bothering me on this track. So I did some cutting here. I'll show you in a second. It's easier to hear on the like master track. So give me like 1 minute. So what I like to do, so this is a nollie trick, and basically what we're doing is we're using this plugin Saturn 2 to essentially gate the snare drum. It's not doing like the gating thing, but it's cutting a lot of the cymbal bleed out, which is really nice. So this is it without it, and this is it with it. Night and day difference. I should also mention that before I kind of add plugins on, I level everything correctly. So I find a balance between the snare top and the snare bottom, the kick in and the kick out. So for example, when I have the snare bottom too high, it just adds a little bit too much of those wires, and you really don't need very much, because at the end you're going to be like compressing and distorting the snare, which brings that out more. So I typically have my bottom snare very quiet and then my top snare pretty loud. And what's crazy about this trick is that it's not really like cutting out the high end of the snare, it's just gating everything after whatever you have this set to. So like I have it set to 2K basically. And then next I have an actual gate. And typically I don't go this aggressive with the range. Like sometimes I'll only go a little bit. Like something like that. But since I'm not using any samples, I just want to cut out more of that personally. It's up to you how much you want to cut out. I just like cutting out a bit more. And same principle as the kick drum, we just first set our hold to get the duration of the snare that we want, and then we set our release. And then next up, I like to use this basement plugin again. And basically what I'm doing is using the resonate option. Before I was using overhold, which is like a really heavy saturation on the frequency that you choose. But resonate, basically whatever frequency you have set here, it'll boost 137 and then it'll cut everything below that. So I basically find where the snare drum has like the thickest sound. So let's dial that in. You can see it's like cutting out a lot, way too much. So for me, it's a nice balance right around 130, 140. It's basically cutting out a lot of the sub frequencies that I don't need while boosting the low end of the snare. I like that a lot. And again, it's basically the same thing as adding, let's open up an EQ. Basically the same thing as adding a cut and then kind of just boosting from there. It's basically doing the exact same thing. I could do the same thing with like a Pro Q3. I just like the saturation that basement adds, but if you don't want to spend money on basement, just do it this way. Same kind of result. Obviously I went way too hard with that, but you know. And then I found that there were a lot of frequencies in the snare drum that I really didn't like the ringing and pinging sound of the snare. And I can more easily show you that once I have the compression on. So again, I like to use distressors for snares. And the general rule of thumb with snares is that you want it to be quicker attack than the kick drum and slower release than the kick drum as well. And basically what you want to do is just kind of find, let me show you actually. What I like to do is go all the way fast with the attack and then kind of figure out where it sounds like we're getting enough of the initial sound of the drum before it starts to compress. So way too quick. So already around 5, I'm starting to hear that I'm getting enough of the transient before it starts compressing, but I like to go a little bit further than that. And around there is good. And then same thing with the release, we just kind of dial it in. And you'll notice that since we're going really slow with the release, we're actually cutting out a lot of the cymbal sound. This is our snare drum here, and basically by having the attack slower, we're letting, let's say for example, this much of the transient pass before the compression starts, and then it starts to compress over here. And then having the release being slower, it's basically dropping the volume from this section until the release releases. So if we have it longer, then it's dropping the volume to say roughly down here for this long, and then it goes back up in volume. So that's why it sounds like the cymbals are actually getting quieter when we put the release longer. Another rule of thumb is that you want basically the compression to last as long as the snare does. So if you're the type of person to look at it visually, you want the compression to end before the next snare happens. It's like an old school rule of thumb. But as you can hear, hopefully, as you can hear, there are some frequencies that are ringing out like dun dun. So I have this EQ on to cut out those frequencies. So one of them just to cut some of that low hum out, and then this one over here, I really didn't like that, so I just dropped it out. And then the snare sounds way cleaner overall. But then that's where I add in another channel strip. This one's the API. And same kind of thing, I'm just dropping the frequencies that I don't want, and I found that there was a lot of low mids I didn't need in the snare. Especially in the mix. I know I said I usually mix with nothing soloed, but it's just easier to show you right now. And then boosting a lot of the low end because I wanted a fatter sounding snare. Before, after. Nice and thick snare. And then I wanted a bit more of the high end as well. So without adding 8K, with adding it, it's just more snappy. And then I added a little bit of 2.5K as well. And if I added too much, we get too much of the cymbals. So I just wanted a little bit of extra spank. And then at the end of all that, I like to add a limiter as well. And basically doing the same thing as the kick drum, just pushing it. This one I actually push more to the point of it actually distorting and saturating. And I'm basically getting it to the point where it doesn't clip, but it's like barely not clipping. And you could go further if you want, but then by limiting it more of the cymbal comes out, and I'm basically trying to do the best I can to make sure that there's enough snap and high end in the snare without it being too cymbally. Let's do overheads next, and it's not really much that I'm doing with the overheads. Cool, so basically what I'm doing is cutting out some of 800 hertz because I noticed that it's kind of a little bit washy. There's not much high end in these mics specifically, and cutting out some of the 800 hertz just like cleaned it up quite a bit. And then there's also, this is my personal opinion, in cymbals I find, especially when it comes to metal music, every instrument has like heavy amounts of 3K. So I find with cymbals, like since they're like the highest end sounding thing in a mix, I just figure I don't need 3K like it's in everything else. So I often just roll back some 3K just to get rid of some of the harshness. And then I'd actually rather just have more of like the super high end in the cymbals without it getting too like whistly. So that's my approach to it. I cut out some of the like low mids that are bothering me. And then just cut out some of the high mids that are also bothering me in a different way. And I just find I get a cleaner result out of the cymbals doing that. And then same thing with the high end, just... You can pretty easily add too much, so I add the right amount. The right amount will be different for everybody, but as you mix more and more, you'll learn what you like, what you don't like. So after the channel strip, I'm doing a little bit of compression as well. Not really much, it's kind of just like adding a little bit of saturation, so I wouldn't really worry too much what I'm doing here. I'll show you what I do compressing cymbals wise later. So again, with the FabFilter Pro Q3, as you may have already noticed, I basically just use this EQ to cut frequencies. I don't really like to use it musically, i.e. like adding frequencies and like making big changes in the sound. I basically just use it to cut out things that are bothering me. That's my approach with these kind of EQs. And there's a frequency here that was bothering me in this. It's hard to hear right now, but there's like in the snare drum, it's basically the same frequencies that were bothering me in the snare drum. I could hear them in the overhead, so I cut those out. So you honestly can't even hear them when I solo them, but. And then same thing, just even getting rid of even more of that 3K area, because it was just like, I don't need it in the mix when guitars and vocals and every other drum is really heavy in it. And then I use a plugin called Soothe, which is basically doing more cutting, but just like frequencies that are way too much. So it kind of just registers ones that are too high. And it's not doing a crazy amount that you can hear right now, but when you put it in the mix and you put it with everything, it's just like getting rid of those problem frequencies just help overall. And then at the end, I have my compression. So I like to compress them a fair amount, but not like squashing them, because then we get some issues where all of the problem frequencies come out a lot more. I like to compress it to the point where the cymbals last a bit longer and we bring the volume of the drums kind of down. Interesting, in this recording, the snare drum's not very loud in the overheads, but you'll sometimes notice that the snare drum is like really loud in your overhead mics. And you can actually bring the volume of the snare out of the overheads, not by EQing, but by compressing. So let me show you. If you have the attack really slow, you can hear the snare a lot. But then if you go really fast with the attack, you can actually notice that the snare drum goes quieter in volume or like falls down. And that's because the snare drum is typically the loudest transient thing in the overheads. You can even see it right here. It's louder than the actual cymbals. So that's the first thing that's going to be grabbed. So by going faster, I don't know if you notice it, the snare drum got a lot quieter. And then you basically just dial in your release to taste. I don't like to go too hectic on the close mics. I do later do a parallel bus that will kind of compress the cymbals and the whole kit even more. But for the close mics, I like it to just be a little bit more transient as opposed to like lasting super long. So then for toms, as you've seen earlier, I just gate them manually because it's just really finicky when you're trying to use a plug-in gate. A lot of times like snares and kicks will just poke in no matter what you do. So I always just manually gate them. I would love to do it with snare and with kick, but it's just like so unnecessary. As you can hear with the floor tom, I can't think of another way to describe it other than basketball-y. It just sounds like you're bouncing a basketball. So there's often a lot of frequencies in the low mids that you don't need. So what I'm doing with my EQ, cutting a lot of the frequency of the low mids, boosting the fundamental of the floor tom, and the fundamental is basically like the note of the floor tom, and then also just boosting the hell out of the clickiness and the stick attack. So this is what it sounds like before and then after. Basically what I'm doing, this is the frequency here that I really didn't like. Let me cut the... And then I found the frequency that sounds like it's the stick hitting the skin of the drum. And then also boosted the high end just to get even more of the stick sound hitting the drum. It just makes the drum sound so much more exciting. And then this is all the low end I'm adding. And I find it important to add the fundamental of the low note because otherwise it kind of gets blended in with the snare drum, since we're boosting kind of similar frequencies and we're trying to get like similar amounts of excitement, but not sounding the exact same. And then I basically do the exact same thing with the tom. Different frequencies, obviously. So this is before. And same thing, I found an issue with this frequency here that was bothering me. So I got rid of that, and then I boosted the frequency of the stick hitting the skin sound. And you can just boost that area. It's usually between 1.5 and 3K. That's where it sounds like it's hitting the actual drum. And then same thing, just getting a little bit more high end out of the tom to sound more exciting, because otherwise it sounds really dull. And then same thing, boosting the fundamental, because once you're adding all the excitement, it seems to get too thin. And that's basically it. And then at the end, just making sure that it's in phase with the overheads with the same technique I showed you earlier. And then on the group itself, since I have them grouped, I'm actually just adding a little bit more high end, not much. And then also limiting them. I've recently started limiting them. I just find it sounds quite a bit better. It's very subtle, but I'm just making sure that it doesn't clip, while at the same time making sure that they're all strong hits. And then with this, I actually don't do anything with the close cymbal mics. I just found like I didn't really need to. It just sounded fine, and there's no ride in the song, so I didn't have to do anything. And the hi-hat, there's already enough hi-hat in the overhead, so I usually just have them there to the point where I can hear them, but I'm not really doing anything with those. And then I have the room mic. Now I'm gonna be completely honest, I did not really like the sound of the room. It's a pretty small room, and there's not really room to put the room mics like far. I usually like getting a huge sound out of the drums, but given the studio that we worked with, it just wasn't an option. So I did what I could. So this is what the room mic sound like at the end of it, I guess. As you can hear before, there were tons of problem frequencies. So let's go to the very beginning. I'm just gonna leave the phase adjustment on just to make sure it's in phase with everything. And then I use the same Saturn trick to basically just gate some of those high frequencies or drop the volume of them a bit in the cymbals. And then I'm doing opposite in this range between 135 and 1.8K. I'm actually boosting those dynamics. Because I just wanted them to last a little bit longer. And then on the low end, I'm doing the same thing where I'm cutting some of those dynamics because I don't want the kick to be too loud in there. And then as you can hear, there's like a bunch of frequencies that sound, to be honest, terrible. So I then put a Fab Q, Pro Q3, and I just put it on notch mode because I was like, I just want them completely out of there. Like no matter how much I cut them, I was like, I can still hear it. So I just put on notch and got rid of it completely. So before, some of those notes are the notes from the snare, like the snare did ring with those frequencies, but I found that even if I had a little bit of that in the mix, it was way too much. So although it sounds kind of strange cutting these out, it's still better than it was before. And like I said, I didn't love the room mic, but it does glue the kit together, so I kept it in there. After that, I have another channel strip. And what I'm actually doing with this one to get some saturation out of the room mics is I just boosted the hell out of the preamp and then just dropped the volume a bit, and we're getting some of the compression within our channel strip here as well. Just doesn't sound heavy enough, so I just like slammed it. And then as you can hear, there was way too much in the low mids. So I cut almost all of them that I possibly could cut out. 9 dB of 700 hertz was a problem. And then I wanted some more snap without bringing in too much cymbal, so I brought in 1.5. Could have went a bit more. Yeah, even if you have a small room, I would suggest setting up even just like one mic and then worst case put some reverb on it, which is what I did on the next rooms. So I'll show you that in a second. But it kind of glues the whole drum kit together. Obviously the overheads are capturing the entire kit, but it doesn't like glue it together like a room mic does, because it's what it sounds like in the room. A lot of the times what you're hearing in like professional mixes are the tones that are coming from the room mic, and I don't know. Room mics just like, to me, create the sound of the drum kit. And then I don't know why in Ableton right now, since I updated it, it won't really play what the gate's doing unless I have it in the mix. So basically I have it set so that the gate, every time the snare goes off, the room mics explode a little bit. So we're getting a lot more volume out of the room mics every time the snare hits. And then for room mic 2, I really did not like the sound of this. We kind of just experimented with it, and Chris put the mic in a locker, and it sounds like there's a mic in a locker. And yeah, it doesn't sound great, and when I take the EQ off, it sounds terrible. So I did the same thing. I notched out that frequency that was pissing me off. Definitely better. Put the Saturn sound on again. And then if you have a room that is not big at all, what a good suggestion to do is take your room mic and then put a reverb plugin on. I use Wave Alchemy's Pulse. I really like this for rooms because we get the plate and the room option. For this one, I wanted a bit more brightness, so I used the plate option. And then I basically did the same thing as the gate, except I compressed it so that every time the snare goes off, since the majority of the sound is coming from the pulse, it's basically compressing the sound so that it has room for the close mics to hit before the room mics kick in. So that's it for the tracks themselves, but then that's never the whole story. What I do is add auxiliary tracks, and these are basically just distortions for each drum. So here I have my kick distortion, and then I really like Decapitator for kick. I actually use Decapitator for kick, snare, and tom, but I just use different channels of it basically, or different styles. So for kick drum, I find that E is like the brightest sounding one. And I usually just want a little extra power out of it, but also some like extra click out of it. And I find that E does the job. And then for the snare, for this specific song, since I don't have samples, I'm relying a lot on the snare itself. So I actually just like killed the sustain completely and then boosted the attack. And then distorted the hell out of it. So you can see I used the same E track on this one, and what I did instead to get a bit of a different sound, instead of getting the exact same kind of saturation as I do on the kick drum, I decided to use the filters to cut out the low end and a lot of the high end. Because I didn't want much of the hi-hat sound coming out, and especially when you distort things, the cymbals come out a lot more. So I rolled it back quite a bit. And then for the toms, let me find a tom section. I always experiment to see with which one sounds best. For the toms, since they're a little bit quieter, I find that I had to go punish, which is like extra distortion. And then same thing, I'm just kind of filtering the frequencies that I don't want in it. And that's basically it. And then I have a reverb track on the snare here. Same Wave Alchemy one on Pulse. And I have it set to really long because what I'm doing is gating it. So within this plugin, you can actually do like the gate sound, which is really popular in like 80s metal and early hardcore. So instead of it lasting forever, we just go crazy on the reverb. I went as large and as long as the room could go, and then I'm gating it. And then I'm gating it so that it stops after my predetermined amount. And you can set it to whatever you want. Just to add a little bit of length to the snare. Then here, I set all of the shells, so the kick, snare, and toms, to their own auxiliary track, and I'm basically just compressing the hell out of them just to get a little bit of extra squash out of the drums. And here's without it and with it. I'm basically like purposely lowering the transients and getting some more sustain out of the drums because I'm doing so much on the close mics and on these distortion tracks to make sure that the transients are like heavy as hell. And with these ones, I just want to get some more tone out of the drums. And then I do a similar thing, but for this one, I'm using Soundtoys Devilock, which is a saturation plugin. If you don't have it, just use whatever saturation plugin you have. And same thing that goes with the decapitator. If you don't use that, or if you don't have that, use like any distortion or saturation that you have and push it as far as you want. And yeah, so basically this last one, I have everything sent to it. Drums, cymbals, and rooms as well. I'm not sending very much of the overheads there because since I'm distorting it, they're coming through anyways. And then this one is basically a distortion track that's getting mostly the kick and the snare, but also you can hear the toms are there quieter than those two, and then the cymbals in the room are there also quieter than everything else. And it's basically just to add like a glue of distortion. The other ones are distorting on their own, but this one's kind of compressing, but mostly we're crunching it down to be like a glued track. So here are the drums without the auxiliary tracks. As you can hear, I've relied on them quite a bit, and usually I don't go as heavy on it, especially with the snare auxiliary track, but I just found since I'm not using samples, I want to get as much slam out of the snare I could, and that was the best way to do it. And at the very end, I have all of my drums in a drum group, and then I have a drum group compressor. And what I personally really like, is the Neve 33609. I just find, I don't know, I'm able to get some like glue out of it that I can't out of any other compressor that I've used. And I'm just setting the attack to be fast so that we're kind of squashing down the really loud parts so that they even out a bit more. And also there's a limiter in there. It's not doing much the way I have it set right now, but it's just making sure that we don't go past a volume setting. I usually do is actually push the gain like a lot heavier. With this specific drum recording, you may not have enough mics or like enough resources to do this, but the engineer put what we refer to as like a crotch mic, and it's basically a mic that's right over the kick drum and it's capturing the entire kit. It's above the kick drum, but beside the rack tom. And same kind of thing, I make sure that the phase is aligned. And then here's with nothing on it. So for this one, I basically went through and cut out the problem frequencies. A lot of low mids, specific frequencies, but then also like general moves. And then I did a similar kind of Saturn trick. I cut out a lot of the cymbal high end, took the dynamics basically all the way out. And then in this middle section, I put like a British rock amp emulation basically. So it's like running these frequencies through an amp almost, saturation wise at least. And then here, just cutting a little bit of the kick drum frequency. So it's almost like it's gating the kick drum a little bit. And then I ran it through distortion. And then EQ'd it. You can see after the distortion, I found that it was bringing out a little bit too much of the low mids, so I got rid of a lot of the 500 hertz, and then I added some 8K and some 2.5K. In certain parts of the song, especially slower ones, the way I have it mixed is a lot of the character of the snare is coming out there, but in fast sections like this song, it's subtle, but it's bringing out some of the ring of the snare. So that's my approach when it comes to mixing drums in general, when it comes to live drums and not using samples. It's so much easier when you're using samples, but nowadays, like I said, it's a difficult climate to be a drummer online. You can't be miming anything because people will tear you apart. So this is how I would go about doing it. If you do want to learn how to edit drums, I'm going to take these drums as well as a few other takes I did from the song, show you how to comp drums and then edit them no matter what DAW you use. I will leave a link somewhere in here when it's done. If you want to check it out, feel free, that'll be sweet. Hope that I covered everything you could think of, but if you have any further questions, let me know in the comments down below. Stick around, subscribe, like, do the normal shit, and if you want to see some more of these kind of videos, let me know what you'd like to see, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.